Hey guys, I'm Eric and welcome back to Driveline. In today's video, I'm just going to get right into some raw conversation with you guys. I've been pulling refrigerated freight for almost 7 years, so I'm pushing up on 1 million safe miles. And I've served on the driver advisory board for the largest refrigerated carrier in the country, which is Prime Inc. And I've had a mini fleet or a private fleet or whatever you want to call it for about 5 years. And that's given me an enormous amount of heartache, exciting times, losses, gains, you name it. And I want to share with you finally something that I haven't talked about on this channel for a very long time. Actually, I've never talked about it on this channel. And that is some of the destruction that came about with my own trucking company with Prime Inc. and with running a mini fleet. And I hope that you can learn something from what I've gone through, maybe take something from my experiences, and maybe you can apply it or use it as a cautionary tale, if you will, on some of the things to avoid, maybe some of the pitfalls to avoid, and some things to think about as you get into a trucking career or as you advance your trucking career. So that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so I want to get into some backstory real quick. I know longtime subscribers, which by the way, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. I try to do pretty regular videos on freight, transportation, trucking, just kind of all the above. But to give you guys some backstory for those who don't know, I began my trucking career pretty close to 7 years ago. And after I got my CDL and upgraded, my wife got on the truck immediately. She rode with me for, I think, about 6 months, and then she decided to get her CDL. So we were a team truck at probably the most opportune time over the last couple decades. And that is that we were a married team truck when COVID hit and freight went bananas. Freight went berserk. And I'll tell you guys, in refrigerated freight, there was no better place to be than a married team couple during COVID, because there was a lot of high val freight, a lot of specialized freight that had to move during that time. And in refrigerated freight, they really like married couple teams to be running this high val freight. So as you can imagine, my wife and I, both being CDL, both being a team truck, we had a lot of opportunity. We had so much opportunity that we were just constantly trying to push, basically we could run whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted, at whatever rate we wanted. And it was quite an amazing time. Now, at the time, we got quite ambitious, as so many others did in the trucking industry during that time. Obviously, I mean, there still is way too much capacity from that time, because so many new drivers had come in, so many new carriers had come in. And by the way, a carrier can be one or two trucks. A carrier doesn't mean like Prime, which is, thousands and thousands of trucks. A carrier could be any size, but a lot of new carriers came into the industry. A lot of new drivers came into the industry. They saw all this money that was being made, all this freight, all the rates going nuts, and capacity just went absolutely crazy. Rightfully so at the time, understandably so. There was a gold rush in trucking, right? So everybody was just flooding in. The opportunity that we saw because of the scenario was that we could go ahead and start expanding, bringing more trucks into play. And at the time, that made perfect sense. We did it. We had this YouTube channel, and we were able to put drivers in these trucks, and everything was great until it wasn't. And there were a couple things that were said to me at the time that I really should have listened to. I wish that I would have listened to, and they're still applicable today. But even when freight and rates and volumes and everything was booming back then, they were very much applicable then, and I didn't listen. I'm just having a moment of honesty here with you guys. I think I've said it before on this channel, sometimes, especially when things are really good, you think that they're going to continue being that good and you'll be able to maintain whatever you're in. And that isn't always the case. So the number one thing, and I get asked this all the time, probably every week, should I start a fleet? What advice would you give me if I'm looking at adding a second truck or a third truck or a fourth truck? If I want to start building a fleet of my own, what are your thoughts on this? And the number one thing that I was told back then by someone who I trust and by someone who has more than 10 trucks running still to this day. And by the way, I know quite a few drivers. I've got quite a few friends that are running 5 or more trucks. Okay. So I know a lot of private fleet owners, both in the prime world and outside of the prime world. If I haven't made it clear, my trucks pull freight for Prime Inc. Some of you will probably have some distaste with that. That's fine. This video is not about Prime or, any specific carrier, but that just happens to be who my trucks haul freight for. So that's how we're going to approach this conversation. Okay. So the number one thing that I was told was your ratio for trucks. You always need to have one completely paid off truck for every truck that has a payment. That was the first thing that I was told. So if you have 2 trucks, 1 truck needs to be paid off. If you have 4 trucks, 2 trucks need to be paid off. If you have 6, 3 need to be paid off, and so on and so on and so on. And this individual actually sat down with me and went through all of this and explained this in great detail. But guess what? I didn't listen. Rates were crazy. We were not having any problems with, driver turnover was always sort of a problem. But I just didn't listen to it and thought that I knew better and that what was happening at the time was going to continue happening and we would always be flush with this freight and always be flush with these great rates. And that wasn't the case. So I went out there and started building a fleet. And at one time, at the height of my fleet, I had 4 trucks. Okay. 4 trucks, all with payments. Now, at the time, I believe the payments with all in with APU, now they're way crazier now, but at the time, I think I was pushing up on, I want to say close to about $5,000 a week in just truck payments. So that would have been $20,000 a month in just truck payments. Okay. So, and that was with no truck paid off. So I didn't have any truck without payments. That was 4 trucks, all with payments, $20,000 a month just in payments. Now, when Jen and I were running as a married team, it was okay because we could cover pretty easily any deficiencies or any problems or any chain reactions that can cost you dramatically because we were a team truck. However, we got pregnant. And some of you lose your shit when I say we got pregnant, but whatever. Jenna got pregnant. We now have our son who's 3 years old. She could no longer drive the truck. It became a solo truck operation. I did some training. I, kept doing what I could do to somewhat drive a team truck, but I also wanted to be home with her. I wanted to be home with the son. So it just, there was that havoc. And all of a sudden, my truck, because of circumstances. Now, you could say, well, yeah, you guys decided to have a kid. Yeah, but there's a lot of circumstances. There's a lot of circumstances that don't just look at that and say, well, my wife and I are not going to get pregnant, so this doesn't apply to me. That's just one of many circumstances that could occur. But that happened. And by the way, I'm not complaining about that either. That is a miracle. My son is a miracle. I wouldn't trade that for the world. Glad that it happened. But that happened while at the same time, COVID freight started, you know what I mean? That whole gold rush started to collapse. So we have 2 things that are happening. One, my truck, the truck that I'm driving with my wife, is not generating the team money that it was generating, not generating the immense profit that it was generating. And at the same time, freight is starting to fall. Okay. So those are 2 things that happen while I have no paid off truck. If my truck is parked, it still has its payment. If any of the other trucks are parked, they still have their payments. Okay. So that created a catastrophic scenario. And it was almost overnight, you guys. It happened so fast. The reason you need to have 1 or more or half 50% of your fleet paid off is because if 1 or 2 or half or more of your fleet is parked for any reason, and my Peterbilt he was broke down for a week and a half. Okay. If you can all of a sudden go $6,000, $7,000, $10,000, $15,000 in the hole, right? Very quickly. If you've got repairs and you've got drivers down or another driver is at home and multiple trucks aren't moving, or they get stuck at shippers or receivers, or they're waiting long periods of time between loads. The chain reaction of that can be catastrophic. And that's what happened to me. I had multiple months in a row where all of a sudden I was finding myself in $10,000 or $15,000 in the hole. And because the truck that I would be driving also had a payment, I couldn't spend myself out of that hole. I say spend, not spend. So that is the number one thing that I didn't listen to, and the number one thing that caused me havoc. The second thing is, I made the mistake of getting out of my truck because I just wanted to be home. I just wanted to be home. I wanted to be with my son. I wanted to be with my wife, who had just had our first son, her first baby. And I just wanted to be there and be supportive and be a father. And so I wasn't in the truck for a good 7 or 8 months. Now, I did work a local job at the time. I was a yard dog in San Antonio. And so that was kind of, it was almost putting food on the table. But the fleet itself was just digging such a hole that was not even, the work that I was doing locally wasn't even offsetting how much the trucking company was putting us in a hole, and just continuing to put us in the hole. And that was, like I said, catastrophic. It was catastrophic. I mean, we went probably, just being completely straight with you guys, we went probably a year with not knowing how we were going to pay the bills the next week. Probably at least a year of not knowing how we were going to pay our cell phone bill, not knowing how we were going to buy diapers, all that good stuff. And it eventually provoked me to have to go get back into my truck full time and start running my truck, which I've been doing the last couple of years. It took me a year of getting back into my truck to carve ourselves out of the hole so that we could actually, not live week to week, not live paycheck to paycheck. That's how broke we were. So it's really a couple years that we were that broke. Okay. And so if I'd gone back and listened to one thing during that time, it would have been, do not add a second truck. No matter how good the freight economy is, or how bad the freight economy is, do not add a second truck unless and until your first one is paid off. You have to be able to run your truck with no payment, or run one truck with no payment to be able to get the second one out of the hole. And you have to be able to run two with no payment to get the third and the fourth out of the hole. Otherwise, you just can't get out. You're not going to be able to dig yourself out. So that was, it's hard to describe it, guys. It was hell. Okay. We lost our fourth truck, had to walk away from that one. And then, I believe it was January of 24, I think. See, this is 25. So I think it was about January of 2024. I had a conversation with my fleet manager. I still didn't have a paid off truck even then. And just went and had a conversation with my fleet manager. I was like, hey, this is a problem, because I had already been driving for about 6 months at that time, back in the truck, back full time on the road. And for that 6 months, I had basically been driving, just running my butt off, not home very much, and not getting anywhere out of the hole. Basically, if I went home for 3 or 4 days, I was not getting out of the hole. I still, even with 3 trucks and that $3,500, $4,000 a week in payments, if the other 2 trucks went sideways, it was absolutely devastating to me. And I could have a week where I would get a $3,000 or $4,000 net profit on the truck that I was running, but the other 2 trucks would cost me that money. So as profitable as I was just watching that money just go right out the door, right? So it was a big, big problem. Now, we had one driver who we still have. He's a very close friend of ours. He drives our Peterbilt, and he had no intention of leaving. He's been driving with us for over 3 years, I believe, and very much trusted him. He's been learning the freight lanes. He cares for our equipment. He cares for our business. He's He's very much, we think alike, and we give him pay raises when that's possible, and we take care of him when that's possible. And then he takes some sacrifices and some hits for us because he knows that that's what's going to make it all possible for him. It's a great setup for him. Guys, driving for a private fleet, just as a side note, if you want to be a company driver, but you don't want all the limitations of being a company driver, find a good private fleet to drive for, because you get all the company benefits. You get, obviously your insurance, your 401k, all the company benefits. You have very little to no liability. But you also have the lease benefits, which are, especially with Prime, I don't know if this is with carrier, same with the carrier that you might be with, but with the lease benefits, you're not governed at 58. You're not forced dispatch. You can fuel wherever you want. If you don't like a load, you don't have to run a load. If you're tired and you want to take a 12-hour break instead of a 10-hour break, you can take a 12-hour break. If you run really hard for 4 or 5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, you're going to get to go home for a week, not just the 3 or 4 days or whatever it is that a traditional company driver would have. So it's a great setup. So we had him, but in the other truck, we had the problem of just constant driver turnover, constant. And this was actually the third and the fourth truck that this was a problem. And we had so many problems. We had trucks, running into things and having to get towed, and people going home for problems that they had at home. We had a team truck where the drivers were fighting on the side of the road. It was just, problem after problem after problem. And that third truck just never once. That third truck, which was a Freightliner Cascadia, a silver one. I love that truck. Hated having to turn it in. But that third truck never even broke even. I think we had that truck for about a year, and not once did it ever even break even. Not once. I mean, there may have been a week or two, but if I looked at it for the whole week, or the whole year, if I kind of went and looked across the entire year and just looked at all of its income, all of its cost, its profit and loss, basically, that truck lost money for the entire year. Because what you have to consider, and a lot of folks who are looking at getting into this fleet business, what they don't consider is having to switch a driver is not a 2-day event. You somehow get it in your head that, okay, well, if one driver tells me they're going to quit, but I've got another driver lined up that can go jump into that truck, that is not a 48-hour scenario. The first driver who's going to quit is going to take that truck to the terminal, whether they inform you ahead of time or not. Leave that truck at the terminal. Then you have to go to the terminal with your truck, and you have to be parked there for at least a week to get that truck cleaned up, have any issues that are on the truck dealt with, get it ready for the new driver, and then wait for the new driver to be routed and show up and get all their stuff moved in. So it's probably going to be 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks for that truck to be moving again. And it's going to take your truck off the road for a week or two to assist in getting that truck moving again. So if you have to switch drivers, you're looking at potentially 2 trucks, your truck and that truck, with no revenue for 2 to 3 weeks. If both of those trucks have payments, that's going to be absolutely devastating. And when that happens back to back, when you have to do that 2 or 3 times within a quarter, again, devastating. Okay. And that was the rut that we were constantly in with that third truck. And it's not that this doesn't work. It's not that running the private fleet doesn't work. It's that it didn't work when all 3 of those trucks had a payment. And that's the scenario we were in. So we had built when things were great, and we built when we were a team truck, a married team truck, where all the revenue, all the net profit stays between us because we're married. So we're not paying out to anybody else or a co-driver. It all stays with us on the truck. We go from that to a scenario where we don't have that. And then we have these, start getting into these problems with driver turnover and things like that, and trucks breaking down and drivers having to spend more time at home than they initially planned, and yada, yada. Anyway, at the beginning of 2024, we did have to walk away from that second truck, or the third truck, however you want to look at it, out of the 4. So as a side note, for those who are out there saying that you can't walk away from a lease purchase or a standard lease, I will tell you that I've walked away from both. I've walked away from a standard lease with Prime because I had to walk away from a standard lease to get into my lease purchase because you can't do both. And then I've had to walk away from 2 lease purchases. So you absolutely can walk away from a standard lease and a lease purchase. I will tell you that. Now I've walked away from one that cost very little to nothing. I think the lowest one I had was like $400 in cleaning fees or something like that. And then I've had to walk away from one that had thousands of dollars. And that was that third one because the driver who was in that was just, he presented himself as something he was not. I'll just put it that way. He left that truck a disaster with damage on it and, whatever. It was. So anyway, that was now the loss on a lease purchase. When you walk away from it, you lose all your deposit and any monies that you put down to have any kind of upgrades. If you wanted a black grill or upgraded headlights or upgraded seat or anything that you did, you pay extras. You lose all that too. So it did cost me in that sense a lot. And it was a very expensive lesson to learn. But now that we're in this sort of freight recession and everybody's just trying to struggle just to get through it, having the 2 trucks in the scenario that I have now is an absolute blessing compared to back then. And I made the decision. Now, sitting where I'm at now, I think, God, I wish I had that 3rd truck. I wish that there was some way to get through that. But looking back and after having that conversation with my fleet manager at the time, we were basically right up against a scenario where if that truck could have turned around, could have got a great driver in it, could have gotten really lucky with some freight and gotten on a good grind, and it could have made it through a few months, maybe. But it's also possible that if that truck continued doing what it was going to do, then it would have completely broke my back and shut down my business. I could have lost everything if I continued trying to risk it with that 3rd truck. And it's basically what my fleet manager, we had a great relationship. He's no longer with the company, but we had a great relationship at the time. I used to talk to him on his cell phone when he was at home. And I said, look, here's my scenario. I think it makes the most sense right now, as much as I hate it to lose this 3rd truck because it's just dragging me down. I know that it was dragging him down. I know that it was a problem for both of us. I said it could come out of this. It could turn out to be a really good thing, but it also could destroy me. And I think this is the best thing to do is walk away from this. And his response was, I can't advise you on which decision to make, but I think that you're making the correct decision. And that ended up being correct because now I'm in a scenario where, because I took risk, and I'm glad that I took risk because risk put me where I'm at, but I took too much risk. And if I didn't rip that Band-Aid off, and if I didn't make the decision at the time to limit and minimize the risk, then I could have nothing. But because I kind of chose what risk I could swallow and what risk was just going to put me in too bad of a position, now I'm in a position where I can spend much more time at home, I'm in a much more manageable scenario. I could scale and grow if I have to. I am going to have to eventually get more trucks because my trucks are about to be timed out here in a couple years. But that said, and I'll give you guys a little bit of a hint of some of the videos that are going to come soon here in the next few months. I will not, as of summer of 2025, what I will not do is go do a brand new truck lease purchase. I just will not. I'm not saying that it's not an okay idea if you're just starting your trucking career, but for someone who's not just starting their trucking career like me, I'm not willing to go reset and do that grind with that high of a payment and that much liability. The payments are just way too high, and the revenue is not increasing in any way to match those payments. So while I'm looking at making some moves to expand or at least keep trucks that are not timed out, I'm not going to do it with brand new lease purchases. So again, that's not me telling you guys lease purchase is a bad thing with Prime. I'm just saying it's not something that fits where I'm at in my career. I'm just not willing to take on that kind of payment when the gross revenues are not there. Right now, I'm in a situation where if my truck only grosses, the truck that I drive, if I go out there and that truck grosses $1,000 on one load, I get a paycheck. That's kind of where I'm at. Now, it wouldn't be a big paycheck, but I'd get a paycheck. So I'm just not willing to have to go out there and kind of start over with a brand new lease purchase. I don't think the market supports that. I don't think Prime's freight supports that right now. Not something I'm willing to do, but there are other ways to get through that, and that's kind of what I'm going to be working on. I will share those with you in the next couple months, but I just wanted you guys to kind of hear what I went through and how, you just need to, as I've said in multiple videos in the last couple months, in times like these where there's just not the freight, where there's just not the strength in the freight market to support high risk and expansion, you really need to get a hold of your expenses in every way possible. You need to get your cost as low as possible. That is, if I could give you one piece of advice right now on how to survive the current freight market, do whatever is necessary to get your cost as low as possible. And I'm talking about subscriptions to things like Paramount or whatever. Like, just go through every single line item of anything you spend and get your cost as low as possible and put as much money in your pocket as possible in these times. If you've got things that are just absolutely eating the shit out of your money every week, this is going to be a really hard go. So that's kind of, how I'm glad that I made that pivot last year. I hated to make that pivot. It's a hit to your pride as a father and as a husband, and as someone who is out there, on YouTube, to have to make a decision like that. It was a hit to me personally because I loved that truck and I loved what we were doing, and I love having this fleet that I could really just kind of nerd out with and tinker with and build. And to have to make a decision as painful as that was just, still hard to swallow to this day. But I'm so glad that I did, and I'm in such a better position now than I would have been if I just had hope that things will get better and that I'll be able to get through it. So I don't know if you get anything from this. Hopefully you can. I just wanted to update you guys on that and get that off my chest and share it with you. I've really enjoyed sharing my journey, both the good and the bad, with you along the way here on YouTube. So hopefully that's something that continues that trend. So, all right, guys, until next time, be safe, make good decisions, and as always, drive to thrive. I'll talk to y'all soon.